It's also the first Tuesday of the new month, which means it's time for another the Sola Mahoney podcast. And in this July 2025 edition of the Sola Mahoney podcast, Sola looks back at World Elder Abuse Awareness Day and shares some reflections. All yours, Sola.
Now, you may well have missed it, but a little over 2 weeks ago, on Sunday the 15th of June, while much of the world was joyfully celebrating Father's Day, others were in a much more reflective mood, marking World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. And that's the day which, since the year 2006, has been set aside to raise awareness about elder abuse and to shine a light on what was, and in many cases still is, the hidden and taboo epidemic of the mistreatment, the neglect, and the abuse of older persons around the world. And how exactly did this all come about? What was behind this movement? Well, it turns out that sometimes such movements begin not with a law or a government task force or a parliamentary committee. Sometimes they have simple, humble beginnings. They begin with just one person, with just one lone voice. And in this case, it began with the lone voice of a Canadian nurse by the name of Elizabeth Podnieks. Now, as a community nurse, Elizabeth had spent years visiting older people, listening to them, and studying their lives, and what she found disturbed her. She'd heard stories of mistreatment, of neglect, of older men and women isolated, disrespected, sometimes hurt, physically and or emotionally, and not in far-off places, but hidden in plain sight, as it were, in everyday homes and hospitals and communities. And what troubled her even more was how normalized it had all become. So normal that nobody was paying much attention to it. And knowing what she knew, she felt that she could not possibly just stay silent. And so she spoke out, first through research, then through advocacy, and finally through a movement, a campaign to dedicate one day in the calendar year, June the 15th, when the world would pause and listen and raise awareness about the reality of elder abuse that she felt had to be confronted and addressed head-on. So what exactly is elder abuse? Now, there are many different technical definitions, but basically it happens when an older person is harmed, physically, emotionally, or financially, often by someone they rely on or someone who should actually be protecting them. Sometimes it's a caregiver who shouts, humiliates, or withholds basic care. Sometimes it's a household that neglects or isolates an older member of the family. Sometimes it's a family member who quietly drains a pension or takes over someone's property without consent. And sometimes it's not a person at all, but a system, a clinic that dismisses an older person's pain, or a community or society that leaves older persons isolated and forgotten. That harm, that abuse can take many different forms, and it's much more common than many people think. In fact, according to global estimates, 1 in 6 older people experiences some form of abuse every single year. And the reason that so many of these cases stay unreported is that victims are often afraid or ashamed of the stigma, or even dependent on the very person who is causing them harm. And sometimes they don't even recognize that what's happening to them is abuse. But thanks to this movement, thanks to this campaign, a number of countries across the world, and notably in Africa, are taking specific steps to confront and address the issue of elder abuse. For example, in Mauritius, where there's been an increasing incidence of young drug users abusing their older parents to get money to fund their drug habit, The government has actually enacted robust laws to protect elders from this specific kind of abuse. And in Kenya, where older persons are often physically abused and at times even killed by other family members, particularly when property is at stake, the government is actively championing a bill that will facilitate the aggressive prosecution of the perpetrators in such cases. And yet the incidence or prospect of elder abuse is perhaps much closer to home than you might think. And I mean that literally, because it may even be that the abuse is in or around your very own home, perhaps in much more subtle form. And by way of example, let me share something from my own personal experience. Because I remember an incident, now with some shame and embarrassment, an incident when I became completely exasperated with my late father, and probably even ended up raising my voice, because he suddenly and inexplicably, as far as I was concerned, refused to sign a form that he needed to sign in order to continue receiving his UN pension. A form that he'd been regularly signing for years, by the way. And I couldn't understand his hesitation because the money was going to go straight into his own personal bank account as it always had. And if he didn't sign the form, there was a risk that he'd lose the money. And so, to be quite honest, I recall that it was a deeply frustrating encounter that really tested my patience. But little did I know at the time that he was not just being stubborn and uncooperative. It was only later that I realized that this was a sign that he was going through the early stages of dementia. And so he was obviously having trouble just trying to make sense of something as simple as signing a UN form. Now, my father passed away in January 2012 at the age of 93, leaving behind his contribution to our national primary healthcare system as part of his professional legacy. And Elizabeth Podnieks, she passed away last year in February 2024 at the age of 94, leaving us with World Elder Abuse Awareness Day as her legacy, the day she gave the world, and a day that continues to live on, and one that we really must continue to honor year after year. So on this first day of July, as we look back on last month's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, perhaps we can remember a few things. Firstly, elder abuse awareness is not just a one-day affair for a few of us. It has to become a year-round activity for all of us if we're going to effectively get rid of this scourge. Secondly, with elder abuse, silence and surrender is simply not an option. We must speak up and reach out and refuse to look away, because every one of us has a part to play in defeating elder abuse. And finally, let's be part of the solution. Sometimes the simplest act, a phone call, a visit, a check-in, can make all the difference to an older person who is feeling neglected. So why not reach out to an older person in your life this week? Let them know that they're seen, that they're valued, that they are not alone. And let's also learn to look out for the signs of elder abuse, because it's not just about bruises and broken bones. It's also about isolation, about fear, about sudden changes in behavior. After all, just like Elizabeth Podnieks, you could be the one person who notices what others overlook. And who knows, that could be part of your legacy.